What if the very moment you stop chasing someone becomes the exact moment they cannot stop thinking about you? Not once in a while, not by chance, but far more often than people realize. Here is something most people never hear about emotional distance. Some people are wired in a way that makes your absence feel much louder than your constant attention ever did. The more available you are, the easier it becomes for them to take that connection for granted. But when you suddenly become quiet, something unexpected begins inside their mind. It is subtle at first, then it grows stronger. Even they cannot fully explain why it happens. They may find themselves reaching for their phone late at night, opening your conversation, staring at your name, reading old messages, and wondering what changed. They might never send anything, but your silence keeps echoing inside their thoughts. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what is happening inside their mind, one step at a time, and more importantly, what you should actually do with that knowledge instead of making the mistakes that push them even farther away. Before we keep going, I want you to join the conversation. Drop just one word in the comments. Type the word silence if you are currently in no contact with someone who keeps pulling away, or if you are seriously thinking about trying it. I truly enjoy reading your experiences because every situation is different and your story may help someone else who feels completely alone today. Now let us keep going because what happens next surprises almost everyone. Maybe you have lived through this already. You gave your time, you gave your patience, you answered quickly, you stayed kind, you stayed loving, you kept showing up every single time. Yet somehow the more effort you put into the relationship, the more they slowly moved away. Their replies became shorter, their energy changed, they seemed distracted. They became harder to reach. Conversations that once felt easy started feeling heavy. You found yourself wondering what happened, replaying every interaction, searching for one mistake that could explain the distance, even though the answer was never as simple as one wrong message. You keep asking yourself the same painful question. What am I doing wrong? So you try even harder. You become even more patient. You give more of your time. You become more understanding, more available, more forgiving, hoping that if you love them a little better, everything will finally change. But nothing really changes. If anything, they seem even farther away. Eventually, you reach a breaking point. You are exhausted. Maybe a friend tells you to stop reaching out. Maybe you read about no contact. Maybe your heart simply cannot carry the disappointment any longer. Whatever the reason, you decide to stop. You stop texting, you stop checking in, you stop chasing. The silence begins. And now a different question takes over your mind. What is happening on their side? Are they thinking about you at all? Did they even notice that you disappeared? Do they care, or have they already moved on? The truth is, they usually notice much sooner than you think. And this is where the story becomes far more interesting than most people expect. To understand what begins happening inside their mind after your silence, you first have to understand how they experience emotional closeness. Their way of processing relationships is very different from yours. They are not looking at the same situation through the same emotional lens. Once you understand that difference, many of the confusing things they have done suddenly become much easier to explain. Keep watching because the next part often changes the way people see the entire relationship, and it may completely shift how you think about your own situation. A person who constantly creates emotional distance usually did not become that way overnight. There was often a reason long before you ever entered their life. Early experiences, often during childhood, quietly taught them that depending too much on other people could lead to disappointment, rejection, or emotional pain. Over time, they adapted. They learned to rely on themselves instead of trusting others completely. They discovered that staying emotionally guarded felt safer than becoming deeply attached. Little by little, their mind built protective habits designed to reduce emotional risk. When relationships started feeling too close, those protective habits automatically switched on. Pull back before things become overwhelming. Create space before emotions become too intense. Hide vulnerable feelings before someone has the chance to hurt you. None of this usually feels like a conscious decision. It happens almost automatically, like a program quietly running in the background. They may not even realize why they suddenly need distance because these reactions have been with them for years. They simply know that when closeness increases, something inside tells them to step away, stay with me, because the next piece explains why this pattern becomes even stronger when emotions become real. Inside them, two powerful forces are often pulling in opposite directions at the very same time. One side longs for exactly what every human being wants: love, connection, comfort, acceptance. They want to feel appreciated. They want someone who truly understands them. They want closeness just like anyone else. But the other side carries an old fear that says getting too close will eventually lead to losing themselves or getting deeply hurt. That fear does not disappear simply because the relationship is healthy. In many cases, it becomes louder as emotional intimacy grows. So these two forces continue pulling against each other every single day. One part wants to move closer, while another part wants to step back. That inner conflict creates many of the mixed signals that leave partners feeling confused. When you were always available, always reaching out, always trying to close the distance, you unknowingly activated that protective side more often. Not because you made a mistake, not because your love was too much. Your steady presence simply made emotional closeness feel more intense, and their automatic defenses responded the only way they had learned long ago. They pulled back, not always because they wanted less connection, but because in that moment closeness itself began to feel overwhelming, and what happens after you suddenly become silent is where everything starts to change. So make sure you stay until the end, because the next stage surprises almost everyone. Their first reaction is usually to create more space. That is how they calm the uncomfortable feelings building inside them. Pulling away feels safer than staying emotionally close. You probably noticed that distance, and your natural response was to try even harder. You sent another message, you checked in again, you tried to reassure them. You hoped one more conversation would fix everything, but every extra step you took often made their protective side react even more strongly. Then they stepped back again. You reached forward again. Before long, both of you became trapped inside the same exhausting cycle. It drains your energy. It drains theirs too. Then one day, everything changes. You stop reaching out, you stop chasing, you become quiet, and from that moment, an entirely different process begins inside their mind. Stay with me, because every stage connects to the next one. If you miss one piece, the whole picture becomes harder to understand. The very first thing that often happens after your silence may sound surprising, even a little painful to hear. They feel relief. Yes, relief. Before you misunderstand that, keep listening, because this part is extremely important. I know it is not what most people expect. Most people hope the silence instantly makes them panic or rush back. That usually is not how it starts. The reason they feel temporary relief actually explains why patience matters so much. Their mind has been trying to manage emotional closeness for a long time. Every message, every phone call, every emotional conversation required energy because closeness itself felt overwhelming. It was never simply about you. It was about what emotional intimacy awakened inside them. When communication suddenly stops, that emotional pressure fades for a while. Their mind relaxes. Their body feels less tension. For a brief period, they convince themselves that having more distance was the right answer all along. That stage is real, but it does not last forever. Do not skip ahead, because what happens after this is where the shift slowly begins. This short period of relief often becomes the moment when many people make the biggest mistake. The silence becomes uncomfortable. Doubt starts growing. You begin wondering if they have forgotten you, so you reach out again just to break the quiet. But by doing that too early, you accidentally reinforce the same pattern that has always existed. Their mind quietly learns that if they pull away long enough, you will eventually return and remove the distance for them. Nothing inside their emotional system has to change, because the cycle simply resets itself. That is why allowing this stage to pass naturally matters so much. It creates space for something new to happen, something that cannot happen while constant contact continues. After several days, sometimes a little longer depending on the relationship, another change slowly appears. It does not arrive with dramatic emotions or sudden declarations. It begins almost invisibly. They reach for their phone out of habit and notice there is no message waiting. They experience something funny during the day and instinctively think about telling you before remembering that the conversation no longer exists. They hear a familiar song. They drive past a place you visited together. They hear a phrase that reminds them of you. For a brief second, everything pauses. It is only a small moment, but those moments begin adding up. Keep watching, because this is the point where the emotional direction quietly starts changing. This stage is not the overwhelming wave of missing someone yet. Think of it as the first ripple spreading across still water, small, quiet, easy to overlook from the outside, yet incredibly important, because this is the first time they are living with your absence instead of constantly responding to your presence. That difference changes everything. While you were always there, much of their emotional energy went into managing closeness, keeping themselves comfortable and creating enough distance to feel safe. Their attention stayed focused on balancing those uncomfortable feelings. Now the situation has completely changed. There is no new message to answer, no conversation to step away from, no emotional closeness demanding immediate regulation. Instead, empty spaces begin appearing where your presence used to be. Those empty moments slowly become more noticeable. They begin recognizing little gaps throughout their day that they never paid attention to before. What once felt ordinary suddenly feels different. Familiar routines seem quieter, certain moments feel incomplete without fully understanding why. This is often where curiosity quietly replaces relief. Questions begin forming. They wonder what you are doing. They wonder whether you are thinking about them. They wonder if you have truly moved on. Those questions do not always lead to immediate action, but they mark the beginning of a much deeper emotional process. And what happens after those questions continue growing is often the stage that catches them completely by surprise, so make sure you stay until the very end. But now you're no longer there for them to constantly react to. There are no new messages waiting, no calls to ignore, no emotional closeness that needs to be managed in the moment. Something quietly begins to change. Instead of their attention moving away from you, it slowly starts moving back toward you. For the first time in a long while, their thoughts begin traveling inward instead of staying focused on protecting themselves. This is where the process becomes surprisingly interesting. Stay with me, because the next part explains why silence often has a much deeper effect than constant effort ever could. Their mind is built to push difficult emotions below the surface, so they rarely jump straight to thoughts like, "I really miss this person," or "I want to talk to them again." Those thoughts feel too exposed, too personal, too emotionally risky. Instead, their feelings quietly disguise themselves as logic. They casually wonder how you are doing. They replay certain conversations without fully understanding why. They remember a small moment that suddenly feels important. They might even check your social media, not because they are ready to reconnect, but simply to satisfy a curiosity they cannot easily explain. They tell themselves they are only looking for a second, only seeing what is new, only checking out of habit. Yet beneath all those reasonable explanations, something much deeper is beginning to wake up. Their emotions are slowly trying to rise, while their protective habits continue trying to keep everything under control. Think of it like someone standing outside a closed door. They keep telling themselves they are only making sure the door is locked, when in reality a part of them quietly wonders what is waiting on the other side. This is exactly why your silence becomes so powerful during this stage. While you were always available, everything felt predictable to them. They knew where you stood. They knew they could reach out whenever they wanted because you had remained consistently present. That certainty allowed them to keep pushing their own emotions aside. There was no urgency, no pressure to truly face what they felt. The connection seemed available whenever they chose to return, so their mind stayed comfortable delaying difficult emotions. But the moment you become quiet, that certainty begins to disappear. Suddenly, they no longer know what is happening in your world. They cannot easily predict your next move, and uncertainty has a powerful effect on the human mind. It naturally draws attention toward unanswered questions. In many cases, that effect becomes even stronger for someone who usually protects themselves through emotional distance. Here is the surprising part. While they often struggle when closeness is constantly offered, they can become deeply unsettled when that closeness is no longer guaranteed. Their logical mind may still tell them they wanted space, yet another part of them quietly wants reassurance that you have not disappeared completely. Those two experiences exist together, creating an uncomfortable inner conflict they cannot easily explain. Keep watching, because this is where everything slowly begins turning in a different direction. As the silence continues, that inner conflict often becomes harder to ignore. They begin paying closer attention to little things. They wonder why you have stopped reaching out. They catch themselves checking their phone more often than usual. They start questioning what your silence actually means. Has something changed? Are you moving on? Have you finally let go? It is an interesting reversal, because now they may experience some of the uncertainty that you previously carried for so long. Their thoughts begin circling around possibilities they never considered before. The story they kept repeating inside their heads slowly starts losing its strength. Before, it sounded something like this: "They want too much from me. I need more room. I feel overwhelmed. Distance is easier." But without your constant presence to react against, that explanation no longer feels as convincing. After all, it is difficult to keep telling yourself you need space from someone who is no longer asking for your attention. That old story begins falling apart piece by piece. And once those protective explanations become weaker, they are left facing something they have successfully avoided for a very long time: the real emotions underneath. Feelings that were hidden beneath fear, habit, and self-protection finally begin moving closer to the surface. What happens next often surprises even them, because once those deeper feelings become impossible to ignore, everything inside can begin shifting in ways they never expected. Stay with me, because the next stage is where the emotional picture becomes much clearer. When those emotions finally rise without being buried under old protective habits, the thoughts often sound very different from before. They quietly begin asking themselves difficult questions. Did I push them too far away? Was I colder than I realized? Are they doing okay without me? Have they met someone new? Did I make the wrong choice? These are not comfortable thoughts. They represent the first real moment of emotional self-reflection. And it becomes possible because you are no longer standing there giving them something to push against. Without your constant presence, their attention slowly shifts away from protecting themselves and toward understanding what they may have lost. This is an important turning point. So stay with me, because the next piece explains why this experience is not only emotional, but physical as well. Relationships are not just something we think about. They also affect the body. When two people build a close connection, their nervous systems gradually learn each other's emotional rhythm. They begin calming one another without always realizing it. One person's steady voice can reduce the other's stress. A familiar message can create comfort after a difficult day. Even quiet moments together leave an imprint. This natural process is often called emotional co-regulation, and it plays a major role in how strong human bonds develop. Even if someone rarely showed those feelings openly, their body still registered your presence in ways they may never have consciously noticed. That hidden connection becomes much more obvious once it is gone. When you step back from their life, even for a while, their nervous system begins noticing something is different. There is an emotional space that was not there before. Something familiar has quietly disappeared from their daily routine, and often their body notices it before their conscious mind understands why. This is one reason some people describe feeling strangely unsettled, restless, distracted, or emotionally off without being able to explain the cause. They may not immediately connect those feelings to you. They might tell themselves they are simply tired or stressed, But beneath those explanations, their body is adjusting to the absence of a connection it had slowly grown used to. That physical discomfort often begins feeding mental curiosity. Questions become more frequent. Memories begin appearing more often. Then another stage slowly arrives, and this is where the emotional picture changes again. It may happen after a week, 2 weeks, or sometimes much longer, depending on the depth of the relationship and the amount of emotional investment. During this period, they often begin doing something they rarely allowed themselves to do while you were still actively present. They start remembering you differently. Keep watching, because this part surprises many people and helps explain why silence sometimes has a stronger emotional effect than constant effort ever did. This is where idealization can quietly begin. It is not manipulation. It is not a game. It is simply one way the mind processes distance. While you were constantly present, much of their attention stayed focused on what felt overwhelming about emotional closeness. They noticed the expectations, the vulnerability, the responsibility that came with deep connection. Those feelings became the loudest part of their experience. But once your daily presence disappears, those uncomfortable pressures begin fading into the background. What remains are the moments that felt warm, safe, and meaningful. Suddenly, they remember the late-night conversation that lasted for hours. They remember the unexpected laugh you shared over something completely ordinary. They remember the day you understood them without needing a long explanation. Small memories begin returning with surprising clarity. Because they are no longer spending energy managing closeness in real time, those memories now carry far greater emotional weight. This is often when missing you changes from a simple awareness of your absence into something much deeper. It becomes a feeling they can no longer easily ignore. And that creates another internal conflict, because needing someone so deeply touches the very fear they have spent years trying to avoid. Their first instinct is often to explain those feelings away. They tell themselves it is only routine. They are simply adjusting to a different schedule. Anyone would feel this after ending regular contact. Maybe they are just lonely today. These explanations help for a while, but they rarely silence genuine emotions forever. Real feelings have a way of returning, and each time they come back, they often feel stronger than before. As those explanations become less convincing, another question slowly begins taking over their thoughts. It is one of the hardest questions they can face. Did I ruin this? That single question carries enormous emotional weight, because much of their identity has been built around believing they can handle life without depending too deeply on anyone else. If they convince themselves they never truly needed someone, then they never have to face the pain of losing them. But your continued silence changes that. There is no reassuring message arriving, no phone call proving everything is still waiting exactly where they left it. Without that certainty, the question refuses to disappear. Instead, it grows louder. Was I too distant? Did I give enough of myself? Did I take their love for granted? Did my constant pulling away slowly push them out of my life? Do they believe I never cared? Do they think I felt nothing? Sitting with those questions is deeply uncomfortable, because it forces them to look beneath years of emotional protection. Many have spent a long time avoiding this level of honest self-reflection. Their old habits usually kept the emotional stakes low enough that they never had to examine these feelings so closely. But now your silence has changed the situation. The usual answers no longer work, and for perhaps the first time in a very long time, they are left sitting with emotions they cannot easily escape. What happens after this point often determines whether those feelings continue fading away or finally become strong enough to inspire real action. So stay with me, because the next stage is where everything begins coming together.